It is not every year that we get to be in the midst of a new console launch. But 2020, despite what it has been until now, is one of those years. Once again, Sony and Microsoft have their respective consoles releasing alongside each other, and it's all happening in just under a couple of weeks. Both companies no doubt have all the attention in the world, but amidst all of this excitement is the other industry giant that remains undeterred by all of this and has its own plans for the years to come. One that has been crushing in terms of sales and releasing quality games. And dare I say it, one that is responsible for the video games industry as we know it today. I am of course talking about Nintendo. Hi, I'm Ishaq, and this is the iXie Gaming Podcast. Nintendo is a name that is synonymous with anyone that is familiar with video games. The Japanese company follows a certain path in terms of how it does business, which has resulted in its fair share of highs and lows. Through its time in the industry, the company has garnered a great deal of admiration from its consumers and critics alike, thanks to its fantastic array of first-party games and properties, and its often revolutionary and sometimes wacky hardware. The company's unique practices and beliefs set it apart from the competition, leaving it in a position where none of the games or services from other companies have any tangible effect on its products. In a sense, what makes Nintendo unique is also what has made the company a household name in some markets. Founded in 1889, Nintendo was originally a toy company that produced handmade playing cards. From there on, the company entered various lines of business, expanding internationally before venturing into the video games business almost 100 years later. After releasing the world's first handheld game system in the form of Game & Watch, Nintendo pioneered the arcades with games like Donkey Kong in the early 80s, before developing and releasing its first home console in Japan named the Famicom, which would later be rebranded as the NES or the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US. The Famicom and NES were a huge success and sold in the vicinity of 60 million by the end of their life cycle. But there is more to Nintendo and the NES than just a success story. You see, back in the 80s, home consoles were all the rage, and systems like the Atari VCS and the Magnavox Odyssey sold in huge numbers in the US. This also meant that there were a large number of third-party game developers producing games for these systems. Given these systems' limitations and the technology being in its infancy, games soon started looking and feeling the same. The market was oversaturated, and the games industry found its profits plummeting at alarming speeds, resulting in the infamous video game crash of 1983. Between 1983 and 1985, the games industry was all but gone, and the future looked non-existent. But Nintendo's NES was the breath of fresh air that the industry needed. Games like Super Mario and Legend of Zelda were screaming innovation by telling more complex stories with innovative gameplay mechanics at the time. To this day, NES is largely credited for resurrecting the video games industry. All the technology, the innovations, and the games that we love and enjoy today may not have been the same if not for the NES in 1985. Since then, Nintendo has been one of the key players in the industry, despite facing heavy competition from the likes of Sega, Microsoft, and its once prospective partner Sony. Over the years though, the company has created an identity of its own through its fantastic games and its colorful characters. If the games industry had just one character to choose as an icon, it will no doubt be a certain Italian plumber with a red hat. Ever since Super Mario Odyssey and New Donk City, Nintendo has clarified that he's not a plumber, but you get what I'm saying. Mario is arguably the most recognized video game characters in the world and one of Nintendo's many success stories. I say one of many as Nintendo's first-party franchises and its characters have become synonymous with gamers over the years. The likes of Link, Zelda, Kirby, Samus, Princess Peach, Bowser, Donkey Kong, Luigi, Yoshi are just some of the characters from the seemingly endless list that one would be attached to if they ever picked up one of those games. I mean, Sony have been crushing it with exclusive games lately, but Nintendo has been doing it since the 80s, and it's still going strong. Part of what makes these games so good is the consistent level of quality. Rarely does a Nintendo first-party IP ship in an unfinished or a buggy state. Nintendo is also not afraid to shake things up by shifting genres with its established characters every now and then. It is bold moves like these that would generally be considered risky by many companies, and an aggressive focus on quality that makes Nintendo's games and its characters so gratifying for its target audience. In today's day and age, where companies almost completely rely on post-launch patches to fully finish developing a game, Nintendo is among the very few that releases a properly finished product. At this point in the history of games development, this approach would even be considered unconventional to some. And that unconventional approach can be found in various aspects of the company's business when looked closely. Nintendo has mostly been a company that focuses on hardware sales over online services. Whereas Sony and Microsoft release powerful hardware and sell them at a loss to later recoup those losses via online services and digital sales, Nintendo releases moderately powerful consoles, which are mostly adequate for their games, and sell them at a more accessible price point, and their robust first-party software provide you with enough reasons to buy their newest hardware. Nintendo has been applying this philosophy for their home consoles and handhelds and have dominated sales records in many of their iterations. What keeps Nintendo's momentum going is their constant pursuit to innovate and surprise players. Super Mario was such a success because there was nothing like it at the time. Video games now had stories and secret levels in them. Next came the transition to 16-bit with the Super NES, which ushered in an era of amazing graphics and full-fledged RPGs. The likes of Donkey Kong and Chrono Trigger are still stunning to look at, considering the time they were released. Further down the line, the company introduced now industry staples like the thumbsticks and rumble support on a traditional controller with the N64, motion controls with the Wii, and now a console and handheld hybrid with the Switch. On the handheld front, Nintendo kept things simple with the Game Boy and DS, while Sony was out there pushing the limits of what a handheld can do with the PSP and Vita. This helped Nintendo undercut Sony's handheld in terms of price, which made the Nintendo DS the highest selling handheld to date. Obviously, it was not always success after success for the company. The GameCube was Nintendo's first console to have a disk drive, but was ultimately considered a commercial failure. The 3DS launched with glassless 3D, a feature that was more novelty and less innovation, and was ultimately removed from its successor, the aptly named 2DS. The Wii U was Nintendo's other attempt to innovate by integrating touch and motion controls with its tablet-shaped touchpad controller, but it ultimately failed to capture an audience and turned out to be the lowest selling console in Nintendo's history of consoles since the Nintendo Entertainment System. All that said, Nintendo's success stories were strong enough to have people overlook these setbacks. From a consumer standpoint, Nintendo has remained a mainstay with video games, one that has been part of many childhoods through its various consoles and handhelds. This is in large part thanks to Nintendo's positive public perception gained through its mostly family-friendly games and the simplicity its hardwares offer to play them. The company's leaders have also been mascots of good practices. During the company's testing times, the then CEO of Nintendo, late Mr. Satoru Iwata, took a pay cut to atone for the losses due to the poor performance of the Wii U. This was unheard of at the time, especially when some CEOs in the industry were making away with millions as bonuses in companies that made money through games with aggressive microtransactions and loot boxes. Another leader in the company, Shigeru Miyamoto, The man behind such franchises as Mario and Zelda once quoted, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." While this quote may sound outdated in a time when post-launch patches are the way to go for most games, it is the principle behind this quote that matters. And it is something that is still visible in Nintendo's first-party games. And Reggie Fils-Aimé, the former president and COO of Nintendo of America, has been a friendly face that has been admired by many both in and out of the industry. And I strongly believe that this friendly and positive image is exactly what the company wants over making as much money as possible in the industry. Make no mistake, Nintendo is still a corporation, and a corporation exists to make money. But the company somehow seems content with the way the business is run and has not changed much over the decades of its existence in the video games industry. As analyst Michael Pachter puts it, Nintendo can make a fortune if it chooses to exploit its properties. But it's Nintendo, and they do their own thing. And he's right in saying so. The sheer number of characters within the Nintendo pantheon and their popularity can be easily leveraged to create movie franchises, TV shows, and comic books. The staggeringly large collection of high-quality classic games like the classic Mario titles, the old Zelda and Metroid titles can be easily leveraged with a re-release on mobile platforms. And of course, they can also choose to provide a robust online service to rival Sony and Microsoft. All of the above is possible should the company choose to do so, and Nintendo certainly has the resources to execute them. But this is something that the company does not seem interested in. Their recent foray into the mobile market has seen some moves that are uncharacteristic of Nintendo, and the company had announced earlier this year that there will be no mobile games from them at least until the first quarter of next year. Perhaps this is a sign of them not being able to cope with a completely new market, or a sign of a particular market that isn't compatible with the Nintendo way of doing business. It isn't very clear, but this does drop a hint of what the future might hold for Nintendo. And that is, the company continuing its legacy of releasing new and interesting hardware and support it with excellent software. There are already rumors flying around for the successor to the Switch, but amidst the noise and excitement of the PS5 and Xbox Series X's release, Nintendo just continues to do what it does best while waiting on the sidelines. If history is anything to go by, we may have less than 2 years to find out what shape and form their next console is going to take. And if we stick with historical fact checks, it will most likely be another iteration of the Switch without too many changes. But then again, this is Nintendo. Only they know what they are doing, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. So what is your take on Nintendo as a company? Have you played any of the Mario or Zelda games? Do you think Nintendo is relevant in a market like India? Let's discuss these and more topics in podcasts to come. Until then, I'm Ishaq, and this has been the iXie Gaming Podcast. You take care and keep gaming.